This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org.
Welcome our friend Josh Green.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming me into your community. It's really a great pleasure for me to kind of get out of my usual comfort zone in Kailua Kona and Ka'u and some cases Oahu, and to see other people. I've had an extremely honored last 12 or 13 years where I've got to serve in the State Senate and State House. I've had a great deal of opportunity to spend time with people on the Big Island to an incredible degree, at every corner of the Big Island, and in different parts of the state. But over the last year or two, I decided I wanted to do more, and I began to speak at a at a very steady pace around the state and ask people what they felt about our state, about the leadership in our state. And I have to say, it's been an eye-opener for me when I've heard over and over again that people in Hawaii feel that the leadership that we have is pandering to the status quo, and that's not good enough anymore. And that they're very concerned about the state, not just of Hawaii, but of the nation. Needless to say, it was quite a shocker this last November for many. I'm not going to spend any time disparaging Mr. Trump tonight or getting into the Hillary and Bernie and all of that business, but I really do feel that when working families, when families that are struggling say that no one's fighting for us any longer, I feel it. I also have a very unique other life, which I'll talk to you a little bit about now. I'm a physician. I'm still a full-time physician, and I have been since I graduated from medical school in 1997. I came to Hawaii in 2000 with the National Health Corps. That's what brought me to Hawaii. I'd never been in Hawaii before in my life, with one small exception, which is I was in Maui for 5 days for a conference. And it was beautiful and people were kind to me, but I had no clue about the nuances of Hawaii or anything about it, frankly. But my National Health Corps posting sent me to Ka'u on the Big Island, where I became the family doctor for 8,000 people as my first job aside from being a waiter. I've been a waiter a lot of times in my life, and a volunteer researcher filling in paperwork and stuff for some of my physician colleagues, but I never had a real job outside of those basic jobs as a waiter, which was hard work, I can tell you. And then I became the doctor for Ka'u of all things. And it was an extraordinary experience. It was a loving experience. It was a stressful experience for me as a new doctor in my profession with a lot to learn. But boy, did I learn. Just like I've been learning for the last several months as I've begun to talk to people about what they would think if I ran for lieutenant governor. The people across the Big Island really showed me what Hawaii is about. They embraced me. They challenged me. I learned about the crises that we face, whether it's methamphetamine addiction, which was an enormous crisis going on in those early years, 2000 to 2004. The poverty that I see, and that is another issue that I'm very keenly focused on. One of the things I think that we need someone fighting for us on is a living wage. I think it's no coincidence that it's almost impossible to afford a house here in Hawaii. And let me tell you a little bit about one of my wife's cousins. My wife I met here after a few years and fell in love and got lucky enough to get her to marry me. She has a cousin who's a teacher, full-time teacher. Her teacher cousin is married to a firefighter who also works 2 additional jobs. They have 1 child, goes to public school, and they can still barely afford to live. They can barely afford the condominium that they have in Honolulu. I work 3 jobs to pay for my 2 children, Maya, who's 10, and Sam, who's 6. And it's just incredibly difficult. And it's another thing that we haven't seen people fighting for. A couple times in these last several years, a few of us have fought for a living wage. It's a $15 an hour wage. That's $30,000 a year. And special interests have stomped it down, put it down. And I was happy to be asked the question by the woman who's pressed tonight. What's her name? Susan. So Susan asked, why would you want to run for lieutenant governor? And the truth is, somebody has got to fight some of the institutions that are blocking fundamental, important change for us in our state. I've been very lucky. I'm a difficult nut to crack for other politicians. When they run against me, they find that I'm one part physician and one part advocate. And I have a great luxury as a doctor to go my own way. I'm not going to hide from my true roots. I'm a Democrat, that's what I believe. But there are moments even when I think some of the Democrats don't have the right idea, and I'm free to fight on those issues. There are moments when the Green Party would be more my stripes, notwithstanding my name or, I'm able to push on those issues. I've been able to work out front with other good advocates like Dr. Pang when we have pushed hard to get some kind of transparency or clarity on issues that are major public health questions. The pesticide question is what I'm speaking of now. Yet another example where I go around the state and I hear person after person and organization after organization say somebody has to fight the special interest back on these issues. Why are we not doing that? What are you guys afraid of at the Capitol? I'm not afraid of anything at the Capitol. Yeah. My level of frustration did rise these last few years. So in answer to the question, why would you leave a safe Senate seat that, people have been very generous with me, and I did mention I hadn't lost a precinct in my whole life, and that's true. It is true. But I don't believe in staying put. And also, it has occurred to me in the last few months, I've been able to elevate the conversation on some issues. I don't know if you've been aware, but there's been a national movement on some things that we've brought up, things I've learned about homelessness, different types of approaches to problems that I've been able to promote, and we've had incredible coverage, whether it's international, BBC and that kind of press, Guardian, or other national outlets, whether it's any of the news outlets, frankly, NBC to Fox to PBS last night. And it dawned on me that we really do have a pretty short bench right now, and we need a few more people out there that are willing to do battle with special interest on behalf of families. It hasn't gone well electorally in the last, say, 12 months for many people, not just in Hawaii. I think people in Hawaii are keenly aware that we need new leadership, at least new leadership that share our Hawaii values. In some cases, the leadership that's out there doesn't speak up or stays very quietly passive when major issues continue to resonate. I was here a year and a half ago when a really extraordinary gathering of people, and I'll do credit to you guys, Therese, you guys.
This was What Are You Grieving? When a lot of us stood up about bean burning, and Josh stood shoulder to shoulder with us and spoke out about health issues for children.
And to observe year after year where the other politicians in my circles at the Capitol, some of them were very good. Connie Elliott actually did a very good job. I want to single him out for praise on this one. But a lot of people stayed quiet and didn't stand up to A and B and didn't press the public health question. I see kids with asthma. I worked on research for pediatric asthma in the islands. Again, families coming to me saying, our kids can't breathe. And why on earth are we letting no regulation get put into place? Why on earth are we looking the other way when chemicals are getting burned in the fields and going up into the children's lungs? I have colleagues at the hospital who've seen large spikes in pulmonary problems when this goes on, and I wondered over and over again, who's going to step up? Who's going to stand up? And I have a unique space in this dialogue as a physician, and not as a pretend physician, not as a physician who retired 35 years ago, but as a physician that is still fully active. Once again, Hawaii's families just said to me, we need somebody that's going to fight for us on these issues. And I do have that capacity. I have the capacity to go out on a limb. I have the capacity to make sure that when there's a question about people having Medicaid coverage and the federal government threatening that safety net that we have, I can stand up and say, I know what it means to have Medicaid coverage and what it means when you come to the hospital. When someone says, what about the healthcare safety net? How are we going to keep that hospital open? I work in the hospital. I know what it means. And then I have a very, it's kind of, it's like a luxury and a blessing both. When you're the doctor and someone comes, and I know you have all experienced this, there is a space where people open up to their physician if the physician's not too judgmental. And I'm not judgmental. I mean, if people have drug problems, they've got a problem. If people believe marijuana should be a part of life, they believe that, and that's what they should be allowed to do. So I'm not judgmental in that space as a doctor, but I do get their stories, and I hear them over and over again, which gives me another window into young families. Even we were, this pretty little thing, Angelica, who's 6, who's my Sam's age, we were able to strike up a conversation quickly because I'm able to do that. It's not difficult for me. We've never met before, but I am very easy to approach and to address problems because you're not going to find much about me that is a typical political animal. I have another job. I'm a full-time physician. I'm not a full-time politician. And so what I bring to this race is something that will definitely be unique and different. I'm not going to disparage my first opponent or my second or third, whoever enters this race, but I'm confident that I will be much, much, much more in touch with what people need and believe. And I also will not pull my punches. Whether the governor is David Ige or a different Democrat, I'll run as a Democrat, and unless it's a Republican that was elected, I would be there as lieutenant governor. I'll challenge their positions if they're not in the interest of people, and I will work to make sure that they better understand what our needs are. I'll be focusing on many things, but I'll be focusing primarily, I would believe, on healthcare for all and a solution to our homeless challenges, and then finally, major change in our public health and environmental health arenas. Now, I'm available. I'm in general, thank you. I'm in general a quick study. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I'm not the dumbest guy in the room. Maybe today I could be the dumbest guy in the room, I hope. But I definitely pick up on things very quickly. And I can pick them up without concern for political consequence because I've always had a really broad base of support that wasn't based on political party. Did I get frustrated over this last election? You bet I did. Do I freak out sometimes when certain politicians win? Of course I do. But more often than not, it's when my own guys win and they have sold us down the river. And that happens too often. That's not the kind of thing you're ever going to get from me. If you feel that I'm out of touch with your position, you're going to call me on my cell phone, which you have tonight. You're going to text me. And that goes for you. And this last few hours and days, it's been people all across the country on homeless questions. It's been amazing. Amazing to hear them and to hear these people interested in what we might do in Hawaii to help. But that's where I'm coming from. I'm really focused on hearing from people, especially Hawaii's families, about what makes them most concerned. And then trying to incorporate that into a broader, I would say, progressive, but also activist position as a lieutenant governor, where I can fight in ways that we haven't seen people fight before. Tonight, more importantly, really, and I was able to get this conveyed to Joe very early on, Donnie, I wanted to be able to have a pretty small venue because we're going to have lots of opportunities in the next 14 months. I wanted to start making sure I got to all corners of the state, and this is about the perfect size group to actually hear from you about what your concerns are. I don't want to give anyone a false promise that I'm always going to agree. That's not my role, right? And your role is to push me and to make your case. Sometimes we're going to agree. Most of the time I have a feeling we're going to agree. Sometimes we won't, but I will explain to you why I feel differently. And if that's not good enough, you'll try to convince me again. And I'm very, very open to that. You will find if you call my cell phone, I'm going to answer. You're not going to get the staff at the Senate. You're not going to get some kind of answering system, unless I'm on call, that shines you on and you never hear back from me. You will hear from me. And I hope that that's something that's valuable to you. I wish more people took me up on that, frankly. I think that there might be a little bit of, until you meet your senators, I think maybe some of the senators from around here are too scary to call. And, I would say that you should take advantage of calling me, and I will try to share with you what my perspective is, and even what the impediments to get things done are. I'll be candid with you. So, just very briefly, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, went to the National Health Corps, and decided to be a doctor because I was very, very worried about public health issues globally. When I got posted in Hawaii, it was a bit of a shock, but one of the great shocks of my life, because it led to meeting a beautiful woman and then having some babies that are just awesome, and getting to serve. After the National Health Corps, and I had some experiences in medical mission hospitals. I'm not your typical missionary doctor. I'm an agnostic Jew, so I've got issues otherwise. But I'm married to a Mormon, and I did some of that work out there in the field, and I got to experience a lot of what people have challenges with across many different cultures. And Hawaii is a unique and wonderful culture where I've been a physician. I ran for office when I saw two children die from head trauma. Two traumatized by head trauma. One died and one lived, both 1 year old. In both cases, the families were suffering with methamphetamine addiction. And the one that lived was run over by a car by his grandfather, who didn't know that he was unsupervised and the kid was behind the car. And that child lived because the nurses, and me to a smaller extent, saved that kid's life. The child that died was dropped from a balcony onto his head, and he didn't survive. Both cases were because tragic addiction had overcome the family. And I said I wanted to do something more, and someone said, well, put your money where your mouth is and run for office. And I did. And then I ran against a guy who was a coke dealer, and so I won that election. And so it was a strange set of circumstances. And ever since, I've been able to just build relationships and have lots of support from a lot of really good Democrats and some really good Republicans even, and a lot of Green Party people who probably think I'm in the Green Party, and the next thing you know, I'm here with you. So I'm going to fight hard to change people's perspective about what it means to govern. You know a little bit about me. I want you to get to know a lot about me, if you can. And if you would do me this one favor, after we've spoken, if you feel that I'm the right guy for you and your beliefs, please spend time either inviting me back or spend time talking to people. I'm always confident that we'll do well if we have enough time to speak to everyone, talk candidly. There'll be ads, there'll be sign waving, there will be fun functions. But in my experience from my first election, where I went door to door for 7 months, that really is the way. And I'm not positive that that's going to be possible. I'm starting 14 months out so I can do some of that. But I'm still going to be a doc for these 14 months. I'm going to still be a dad. There's nothing that will pry me away from my 10-year-old daughter for more than about 3 hours, as you can imagine. My wife and son seem to be okay on their own, but she and I have that kind of bond. And I'm very reluctant to neglect them ever. So there may be moments where they are chosen over the campaign, but otherwise, if you can help be my voice or help me get to the right people, that would be very helpful. I've spoken enough. I really want, at this point, if it's okay with you, to have you pepper me with questions or concerns or big issues here for Maui, or statewide, if you're a passionate leader in some field, so that I can begin to absorb those into what I would like to fight for and begin to study them. In almost advance of getting the job, if people will have me, I want to be able to hit the ground running and achieve there and get things done. So I'll stop now. Again, thank you so much for having me. It really is a pleasure. I love Maui, and I love Ka'u and my Big Island roots, but it's fun to be out in new settings. And I'm looking forward to this next year where we get to do this a lot.
If you would. I would like to know I liked your ideas about health and homelessness.
Yes.
And how not having a place to live contributes to health problems. I'd like to know what you think you could do about that as Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Well, you're doing me a big favor. This is the issue I'm spending more time than any other issue on right now. The question was, Josh, what do you think you can do on the homeless challenge? Your position of creating a nexus between homelessness and people who are suffering chronic disease and medical challenges has been widely discussed. Okay, so let me frame the question and the challenge for you a little bit better. We have about 7,500 individuals that are chronically homeless in the state of Hawaii. It is a tragedy in every single case. Some people, a small number, make a choice and choose a way of life, but many others are suffering really badly with either mental illness, drug addiction, or they've been economically devastated because it is really, the deck is stacked against families nowadays in the middle class. And as many as 20% of our population, 200,000 people, are just 3 paychecks away from being homeless if a crisis strikes. That's not lost on me. In addition, my role as a physician has been to take care of people, often who are homeless. About 30% of the people that come to the ER are homeless individuals. They come through, they're sweet people, they are like me or you, except that they've had a tougher go of it sometime in the past. And they're having a person like me treat them over and over and over again for the exact same condition. The average impact on their life is tragic. An individual who is homeless has an average lifespan of 51 years. An individual who is not homeless, any one of us, unless some of us are homeless in this group, lives an average in America of 77, 81 in Hawaii. So it knocks a full 3 decades off of your life if you're homeless. When I became chairperson of the Human Services Committee, I also had the luxury of seeing that budget, being responsible for the Medicaid budget, and being able to see the many circumstances that led to people becoming homeless. I was able to, I'm pretty analytical as a well-studied individual, and I was able to learn that, number one, the percentage of people that are homeless suffering chronic disease is profound. And as an ER doctor, that perspective, I saw we don't treat those illnesses. We just put Band-Aids on the problem, and people go back out to the street. They very rarely get drug treatment. They very rarely get treatment for their schizophrenia or bipolar disease. They certainly don't get help with their economic crises. And then on top of that, when they come back into the ER over and over again, but don't get that roof over their head, the cost to care for the individuals, I looked into the numbers, the actual numbers in our state. First, for people who are really struggling and are having, needing medical coverage, Medicaid, 3.6% of our population, just a very small sliver, about 13,000 people, are consuming 61% of our Medicaid dollars. And that's a $2 billion budget. So if you do that math, I've done it many times, for those 13,000 people, the average cost is $82,000 per person per year. Now, which of you in this room have, for the last 5 years, each spent $82,000 a year? No one. Not you. Not me. I've had kidney stones. I had a hernia. I had small stuff, right? Had some other things I won't mention. But none of us have spent that much money, and those individuals didn't get any better. They didn't get better help. The homeless population, especially the chronic homeless population, is a perfect subset of that 13,000 people. Everyone who is homeless, or virtually everyone who is homeless, who has any chronic illness, and that's almost everybody, is spending, the range is $35,000 to $120,000. That's the regular range. There are a couple individuals, one gentleman named Gary, gave me his name and we're friends, and he told me to share it with people. I won't mention his last name. Went to the hospital 241 times last year. Spent almost every day, 2 out of 3 days. Some days he was admitted, so he was overnight. He spent $1.2 million, and there's got to be a better way. First, there's a better way to help Gary, or better way to help any number of people, the thousands of people that are chronically homeless and need some help, if they would accept it. But at the same time, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars and not getting a result whatsoever. So I worked with some good people at Helping Hands Hawaii, and they studied the problem. And they found that the moment we put a roof over people's head in Housing First programs, it brought the healthcare costs down by 43% for those who are suffering. Now, 43% times that average of $80,000 is a $35,000 savings, which includes the cost of giving them a roof over their head and making them better and get better. So I propose that what doctors should be doing, and nurse practitioners and all healthcare providers, is they should be prescribing, literally prescribing housing, and it should be covered by Medicaid.
Wow.
And when you start to look at that, at first there was a bit of shock. Would you really use that safety net to provide for housing? And I put the question back to people. And this, I'm going to give this long answer because it speaks to many different issues about where I am and how I approach things as a doctor and a legislator. First of all, if we could save 43% of our Medicaid spend of that $1.2 billion, 43% would be $500 million that we could better utilize in the state for any number of things. And that would also have included the economic benefits of putting people into housing. And if you do have a small business and there's someone who's suffering in your neighborhood and they're living on the street or in your, in your doorway and you're heartsick over how they're struggling, they would be better off. Now, it can't possibly affect and succeed with everybody, but the day that I saw Rush Limbaugh say this was a good idea because it was fiscally sensible, and PBS say it was a great idea because it was socially conscious, I knew that there was a way, occasionally, to bring people together on an issue. I was then contacted by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to present to them. And PBS, here, Mark, and PBS and NPR several times, and in Seattle and Los Angeles and all across the country. And so when I see that kind of possibility with a single idea, and believe me, I put a bunch of ideas out over the years that have gone nowhere, that I thought were maybe even better, or more sensitive, or more necessary, it tells me that there is hope for ideas and for solutions. And I'm going to go propose and see this happen in Seattle, I believe. Boston's taking a look at it, Rhode Island. I mean, there are ways for people to come together. And when you see as many people as I do, I've seen probably 40 or 50,000 individuals in our state in person over the many years as a doctor and then as a politician. I'm pretty convinced that there is not that big a difference between the most zany person like my mom, who will go all in on any super progressive idea, and the most conservative issue where I've got a couple uncles who are hard to tolerate at the dinner table with the most conservative issues. Most of what we deal with is somewhere in the middle. They would like to see this homeless person do better, or that family. They certainly don't want the kids, of whom 25% of our homeless population are children, continue to suffer. They don't want to see our budgets going up in smoke. They don't want to see people being subjected to violence or rape or not being able to get an education. And this is just one issue. There are so many other issues where I think that I offer a relatively unique capacity as a physician legislator to weigh in on. No one has been more angry, I don't believe, as a legislator than I with Monsanto and those groups that they spray chemicals and they distribute relatively poor research and they go into communities and don't, open up about what they're doing. But because of where I come from, back east, I sometimes even have a capacity to press them and work at least putting pressure on them in a way that just might get us a partial result. Now, I'm not so crazy to think that I can solve every problem or penetrate some of those large corporations, but I can push back with medical expertise and I can push back analytically, which is what I did with the housing as healthcare, is how we've kind of described it on homelessness. And it reflects a bigger change on how we handle our budgets. And then what we could possibly do if we had $500 million to solve these problems like the rail question or our public school challenges, where we are perpetually underfunded for not just our traditional public schools, but the charter schools. Some people are firm believers in them. There's lots that can be done, but we never do anything in this government, I've found, because we always get caught in the status quo and the families' issues fall aside. The special interests tend to prevail because they're sitting at the Capitol with paid lobbyists, and people's issues, which continue to resonate, get lost.
There's more to our show in just a moment. This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org.
I wanted to bring up the thing that I'm concerned about when it talks about these environmental issues and talking about the pesticides and the cane burning issue. You must see this as a physician. People never talk about the cost of the medical costs to people, the time off work,
Yes.
the economic burden put on the citizens and people by the activities of these corporations is never, I never hear it being addressed.
Let me restate your question so that the camera can hear. The statement was, why is a part of the dialogue not about the consequences, the economic and health consequences on people discussed when you have cane burning or pesticides and people miss work or people end up being disabled? And the reason is because it is a very convenient hidden assault on people where it's extremely difficult epidemiologically to describe a lot of those things, because you can't, when a person misses several weeks of work, it's very difficult to characterize why they missed work. People don't end up seeing that in the same column and ledger and story as the day that the cane spread right across the field or that there was a pesticide scare. They're rarely connected, and then there's a machine of propaganda usually from larger corporations that gloss over the human stories. Now, a lot of times a good human story can be told by an excellent person in the media. But
Here you go. You made that connection with the economic connection with
Yes.
the homelessness
yes,
and how they end up in the emergency room
yes,
and spend so much money
yes.
on the healthcare system. The same thing literally happens. And we've seen it so much with the cane burning. How many people lie in the emergency room when there's been a big burn?
Yes.
And somehow it's, oh, it was the bomb, or it was the this, or it was the that. I mean, we know so much
Yeah.
the machine about that. And what's usually missing is like to have those hard facts and research that can point to this is what's been happening.
Right.
And this is how it's affecting us economically, not just on our health, because a lot of people in government don't care about personal suffering, but they look at the dollar.
Let me further unpack that for you. So, a lot of times, politicians get into office, and that ends up being their entire life. And it is very easy to gloss over and ignore the human component of the experience. You tend to only see politicians during the election. That is, I think, something you'll admit. Every once in a while, there's a talk story here or there. When you go back to Big Island, God help you, but you're going to see me in the ER real frequently, and I'm going to know your personal story. And I won't know necessarily, because I've never taken care of a patient. Actually, that's not totally true. A couple of times we had car accidents in Maui that I stopped on the side of the road and participated in, but in their care. But aside from that, I really am very familiar with the human impact. It was asked, why do you think you'll be, earlier in the previous question, what will you be able to do on homelessness as a lieutenant governor? And this is an extension of your question. The lieutenant governor in Utah, for instance, was tasked with solving homelessness. A guy named Pendleton, Doug Pendleton, came. He's the homeless czar in Utah. They were able to solve their problem in different ways. They had some advantages over us even. They have God help me. My wife's over at the hotel right now, so I can tease her. But the Mormons came together, better than a lot of other cultures do, and they were able to, in a very, very direct and organized way, use the church and government, which was almost entirely LDS, and pass legislation and funding to help people. But that lieutenant governor was tasked with a large job, and the handcuffs were off of that person, and they were able to succeed. That's the kind of thing I will do, but I'm able to, as you heard from my example with homelessness, I'm able to unpack those numbers. I'm able to look at the real cost. For instance, I can tell you right now, this is in my wheelhouse, but anything in health and human services, I have the numbers in my brain. For instance, 21% of all the spend at HMSA, which is basically the entire health system with the exception of Kaiser. You guys have a large Kaiser presence, but the rest of the state is 77% HMSA. 21% of all their spend's in the ER. They do $3.1 billion. So that's over $600 million of resources are spent in the emergency departments. I know what you see in the emergency department. I know that most of the time it's unnecessary. Certainly could be prevented or better treated at health centers, community health centers, or primary care physicians who know you. So I'm very, very familiar with the things that at least touch people in health and human services. Good. However, I do have learning to do. You know, I've been lucky because when I get passionate about an issue, I tend to attract some of the strong-willed rabble-rousers, like the one in the back here, and I rely on Lauren Pegg for what? And I rely on expertise the best I can, and I'm not shy about taking it over industry because I do have another life. You know, it was asked, what are you going to do if you lose? Well, I don't like losing. I've never lost a race like that, but it would be okay. I mean, I have a role to play in Hawaii, which is as a healthcare provider and a medical director and so on. I like doing that. But it's very frustrating a lot of times to try to solve problems one person at a time. I do that because it's gratifying, and I do it back in my community, but there are some pretty large issues. I'm very worried about the pesticide issue and its impact on neural development in children. I'm very worried about that.
I have a couple of issues that come to mind I'd love for you to talk about.
Yes.
One is marijuana, medicinal and recreational.
Yes.
And as far as like caregivers and patients and their ability to grow their own medicine.
Yes.
And then another issue that I'm really concerned about, I'd like to hear your stances on, are regarding vaccinations, enforced vaccinations such as like HPV vaccinations.
Right. You bet. Okay, so thank you for picking two massively controversial issues. Put me on camera. And this hopefully will be a test of whether or not I'm a BSer or not, okay? First on marijuana issues. I think we are moving as a society towards decriminalization and legalization, and that makes sense. One of the reasons, and I spoke with Joe earlier about that today, I've been challenged on this issue, and I believe that we absolutely long ago should have had medical marijuana in a way that was accessible, easy for people. This is my belief, because a lot of people, especially in the cities, can't grow. And some of the stuff that they did in the legislation, which I don't like, was meant to curtail people's ability to grow on their own in the rural communities like Big Island, where a full half of all the medical marijuana licenses are, 50% for the whole state. Yet Big Island's only got 15% of the population, so, you know, you can calculate that. I think we should move towards legalization over time, and probably sooner, because, a couple things. One, I do have concerns, lingering concerns, only about young people. I don't want people whose brains are still developing, unless they have a serious illness, perhaps epilepsy. I don't want them in general using marijuana, because you are developing, and I'm somewhat mindful of that. But more importantly, I am overwhelmed by the crisis that crystal methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, all those other drugs, and the havoc they've wreaked on society continue to cause. And I'm also very focused, I could speak for many hours about the opioid epidemic and the part that unfortunately physicians have played in that epidemic. Again, for chronic pain, you are much better off using marijuana for chronic pain than opioids, than Norco, Vicodin, MS-Con, OxyContin, stuff that tears your liver up, affects your ability to think, drive safely, and so on. So I think we would be better off both medical sociologically to have marijuana available for people, probably economically. There are some very rational reasons to legalize, especially with the tourist industry, which is certainly not lost on me with 7 million people coming. And finally, people just have a right as adults to choose what they want to do. The problems I've had, and I think some people have been frustrated with me over the years about this, is I've not wanted to see it be a complicit corporate program where a bunch of corporations come in and own the rights. And we already were seeing that. I pushed back very hard against that. And already the lobby groups represent those guys and are locking it down. So I'm saying we should open it up and let people be responsible. Finally, on medical marijuana, or just marijuana use in general, the more research we do, the more experience and exposure we have, the better we can make decisions as societal members of what's safe. What is the appropriate, and I don't know this, I'm not an expert, what's the appropriate blood alcohol content of active cannabinoids, of active product in marijuana, THC and so on, that's safe to drive or not safe to drive. And frankly, we all, believe me, if I drink a beer, I get someone to drive me, just because I don't want to be that one politician that's stupid enough to run over somebody, you know, and hurt them, God forbid, even if I'm stone cold sober. So I'm very careful. But I think all of those reasons mean that we should move to a sensible program like a lot of Europe on marijuana. That's number one. Okay. Number two, vaccinations. This is a challenge for me. I am a physician. It is frustrating for me and heartbreaking for me when I see a child, for instance, goes beyond your question, but I'll get to HPV. It's scary for me when I treat a child with meningitis, when, from my medical perspective, and it is one perspective only, that I know that, at least in my training and my experience, it's less likely they would have had meningitis if they had been immunized. However, I'm also a sociologist at heart. And when people in communities make decisions for their own community and their own lives, I respect that. There are a lot of things we can do intellectually if we have a higher risk of spreading infectious disease that we can avoid. HPV. I've seen and treated some young people with cervical cancer. I also know that people have a right to choose when they're going to take vaccinations and when they're not going to. And the consequences of forcing people into medical decisions, I can tell you from experience, whether they're vaccinations that I happen to in general believe in, I'm not going to lie, my kids are vaccinated, as am I. The consequences of forcing them to do something in their lives that they don't want to do, take medications that are expensive, take vaccinations that worry them, are much worse than the epidemiologic impact of not being fully immunized as a society. And that's me as a doctor. You're going to get me, in general, in a biased position in favor, in general, of vaccinations. But I will never tell somebody that they have to get a vaccination because I believe something that they don't. I will give them informed consent. I will also tell you that I had to have a very tough conversation, the toughest conversation, with one of my dear friends not 36 hours ago, whose child died of a very, very severe infection. They didn't know, the family didn't know initially whether this was one, it's a 2.5-year-old who died just this week. Didn't know if they could have saved their kid by vaccinating them. It turns out they couldn't have. The illness, the bacteria that killed that child was not a bacteria that would have been stopped by a vaccination. And I was happy as a doctor to be able to tell them. It was a very ironic situation where they had to call me as a senator to get the medical records. And as a friend, I was able to communicate this with them. And amazingly, I was actually trying to get the ambulance from the other hospital while on duty to transfer another patient at the very same time that 2.5-year-old was being transferred. That's how small this community is. And in my world, it's unbelievably small. You could imagine the chill that went down my back when I realized that at 1 p.m. on Monday, when I was 60 hours into a 72-hour shift, that was the ambulance that I couldn't get for my cardiac patient because, God help us, this sweet baby, who's a family friend's grandson, was dying, and he did die. So I try to be very analytical about it. If a person asks me, do you think I should get my kids immunized? I'm going to tell them yes. It's what I did for my kids. If they say, you're our senator, are you going to force me to get my kids immunized? The answer is no.
But each year, aren't they changing these immunizations? So they're different from year to year now.
The immunizations can change, but as far as mandates go, the laws don't change because this is an interesting circumstance. Take other issues like fluoridation of water, mandatory immunizations. I could name any number of them actually, but issues like that, when people speak up passionately and have a strong personal feeling about something, they tend to remain in dialogue and not pass at the legislature. That's been the case at least for these issues. And I've been in different places. I've evolved as a legislator, to tell you the truth. When I came in at age 34, I was a little bit brasher, and I came in thinking I know better. And I learned through experience and through experiencing many, many people's real human stories that there are a lot of perspectives on these things. And there are also a lot of ways to help people in society. The larger issues that I've tended to take up, therefore, have been issues where I feel that it is not a choice between small groups of people, but instead when we are being pressed by very, very powerful special interests against the overall best intentions, best interest of people. And so that's where I've tended to fight. So you will, if you look into my record a little bit, you'll see that when I saw the insurance companies refusing to cover care for children with autism, I fought to make sure we passed that. When I saw big tobacco continuing to spread addictive nicotine, we increased the age to 21 for smoking. We taxed the heck out of those products, and we built a trauma system and a community health system to put it in their face that we were going to take their money and we were going to do something good for people. So those have tended instead to be the issues I've pressed. So you will see that I have not submitted legislation that's divisive between people. We have big enough fights against very powerful special interests, as far as I'm concerned, to fight all day and night, year after year, as opposed to the ones between good citizens who happen to just have different opinions.
So the current occupant of the lieutenant governor position is interested in running for to be mayor of Maui because he doesn't feel he has anything significant he can do in that role.
Yeah.
So why do you want that role? How could you frame it? How could you get some real power beyond what is currently?
So it's been interesting. Let me be candid. The governor wouldn't even speak to Shan for some reason. They had some kind of competitive problem. I don't know what it is. And that was their issue. That was their personal issue. I happen to know them both very well. I served under Shan when he was Senate president. We got along very well. And I was in David's little clique when he was becoming Ways and Means chair, and I helped him with that and so on. I am a very different person than Shan. And I'm not going to say anything critical of Shan here. I don't depend in any way, shape, or form on success in politics to express success in my life. It is just a piece of my life historically, and when I feel strongly about an issue, I get to go for it. I only had an epiphany last year that I can make national hay even as a state senator, but it was very difficult. I've probably had 20 issues over the years I would have expected instead to have reached national attention that didn't, and then this one did. And I now know how to do that. And as lieutenant governor, I become one of 50 across the country. I'm not going to be shy about this. If David wins, he will be entering the last term of his career, and I am my own person, and then some. If there's a different governor, you have to realize that there is only one physician legislator in the state, and I already have been satisfied with what I've been able to contribute at the state Senate level. I was going to do something more all along. At this point, I'm not so arrogant as to imagine that I should become governor. I don't know that that would be the right thing. People are asking me, as I've gone through a couple meetings now, and I hate to say it, but pretty much everyone says you should just run for governor instead, and roll the dice and see what happens. But I'm also cognizant of how I've developed personally. If I spend 4 years as lieutenant governor, number one, I think I'm going to be able to do a heck of a lot on homelessness and health issues. More than enough for any one individual to take on over the course of 4 years. Even if they frustrate me, as you can see, I go my own way when I see some need to solve problems. Thereafter, who knows? But I do have some growing to do in this job as an executive. I've never served as an executive, and I'm mindful of that. Why Shan and the current governor couldn't get along and find a niche, you know, there's a lot of stories behind that, I'm sure. I don't expect that kind of animosity between myself and whomever becomes governor. To be completely honest, and this will sound a little crazy, I wish I could serve under Democrat or Republican and do what I do, which is to take on large issues with an even bigger podium, force the dialogue, force my Democratic colleagues to own up to some of the stuff we've been ignoring over the years, and force the Republicans to shape up on areas nationally where they've been too cruel to the gay lesbian community or too cruel to not fund the safety net. I offer a different perspective, which is that of a healthcare provider and someone who's had just enough experience to be both partially driven crazy by my colleagues and partially driven to action because I get so frustrated to have the same conversation with people over and over again when they would really like to see action on a living wage. They'd really like to see some kind of sane action on pesticides, where they'd like some guarantees that their hospitals are going to stay open. Instead, we leave people in limbo. And I'll speak candidly, just like this. When I'm at the Capitol, it's like this, only worse, because I got people with crazy egos and I'm saying these things, and then they get mad. But you guys are at least nice about it, okay? I think I can bring something quite different. I think it will freak out whoever the governor is if I go out on a limb frequently. And they often pat me on the head and say, oh, that's just the doc talking. But a lot of times they do take to heart if I have an idea of what we should do at the hospital or what we should do on immunizations or pesticides or whatever, because I'm really close to these issues. And if I disagree with them, we'll disagree. I'm not gonna leave that door, I'm not gonna shut that door totally until the fall. I want to be clear about that. There is some possibility I'll run for governor. My inclination is that it's the right thing to do to run for lieutenant governor and take on these challenges and see if I'm any good at it. I've seen a lot of politicians that are terrible at their jobs, yet stay in office time after time after time, and it's unbelievable to me. Believe me, I will be the first one out the door if I stink at my job as lieutenant governor. But I did a good job as senator and I grew, so it's just that time for me, I think.
Another thing is, the money is so overwhelming.
Yeah.
When I look at Monsanto with its 11 lobbyists, and all the other seed companies have just that one issue, you just go, and the fact that the 3/4 of the legislators who live on Oahu don't really understand the issues out here. And it always seems to me that rat lungworm or cookie frogs or fire ants, well, that's just Puma's problem, or the cane burning, oh, that's just far away. And and I remember a couple times I go to Honolulu and I think the outer islands could be Tonga as far as the mentality of people who are concentrated there in Honolulu.
Yes. So to restate the question, if it wasn't audible on camera, why do we get screwed over as neighbor islanders constantly? Why are we ignored and why are our problems ignored? Well, first, you already answered the question to a large degree, which is that yes, 3/4 of them are in a niche on Oahu. Many of them are good people. And many of them don't have the first clue what it means to have a healthcare shortage, to not have a primary care physician, to know what the impact of cane burning is or coking frogs. So that is absolutely true. And it's also very difficult because when you get caught up in the life of the legislator and those committees and all of the strange dynamics that go on, the lobbyists do have an outweighed power. However, a couple things I've learned in politics, and I've learned some of these lessons from just being a citizen watching national politics, that an outsized personality with a big mouth, but who has the data behind them, can move mountains. And when there is charisma and when someone is willing to go out and speak up, we can change things. I hope to be a voice on behalf of, I'm hesitant to say the neighbor islands, because I also spend a lot of time on Oahu and I want those people to vote for me too, to be totally honest. I want them to vote for me because they trust me as a doctor, as a professional, and as someone who is really ready to fight for families instead of special interests. The neighbor islands are going to get more bang for their buck out of me, because was I living rural for many years. When I lived in Kau, I had no cell phone connection. I had no computer in my office. I saw what it meant to have an 1 hour and 5 minute transport time to the hospital. I know that we often didn't have antibiotics suitable at the local pharmacy, and it was going into the weekend, and the people were too poor, a lot of my people in the community, to even have gas to get up to town. And I'd have to worry all weekend that their infection was going to become severe. So I know exactly the kind of things we deal with as neighbor islanders. I know how hard it is to find a plumber sometimes. And I know how a lot of times there's more ambulance service, or the schools get better funding when they're on Oahu, or they get the special project. So I'm going to emphasize that when I'm spending time on the neighbor islands, that people get a lot out of me. The truth is that we should have gotten that out of Shan, and David did not treat him as respectfully as I would have liked. And Shan had some very choice words, which I won't repeat, about that experience, and he made a decision. But he and I are quite different. I'm not the kind of guy that waits. I ran for public office only after living in Hawaii for 4 years because I saw people that were really, really hurting. And I figured, okay, I'm going to go there for 2 years, make a lot of trouble, and bring really as an activist voice, bring attention to some of these disparities. But once I got there, I realized that I had access to media. I had access occasionally to fund a community health center. It was the first thing we funded for Kona. It now has 130 employees, and it takes care of all the primary care for all of, you know how we started that health center? I left my job as I was running. I was working in the ER. I finished my National Health Corps commitment, and they needed a volunteer because the doctor that was the doctor at the community health center was shooting up heroin in the back room and needed to go into rehab. And they needed a doctor to co-sign charts for the nurse and see people. So I would go in there 2 times a week, 3 hours.
Is this the same guy that was running for office?
No, different guy. We had a lot of drugs. We got a lot of drugs on the Big Island. And this guy got better, and the drug dealer is doing better, in his life. But I'm not judging. It's just wild. The things I see in people's lives. We all have some issues. I've had some issues, But for maybe a second talk story, we'll talk about those issues. But when I saw that, I volunteered there 2 3-hour segments a week, started signing charts. We gradually hired another nurse practitioner. I got in, and of all people, I got Lingle, my first appropriation. See, in order to qualify for federally qualified dollars for a health center, you have to show you have a full-time provider. So they couldn't put the application in until I volunteered. We got rejected the first time, so I kept volunteering. I shouldn't say I think I got paid $15 an hour. I took $15 an hour so that it looked sane, as the doctor, getting $15 an hour to sign charts. After the first session, I got a $425,000 appropriation with Governor Lingle. I don't know why she picked that one, but she came with a big check and she signed it. I've gotten along basically with each of the governors because I don't want to make a conflict out of it. I just wanted to take care of my community best we could. We got that $425,000. That was enough to hire a real doc full-time. Now they had a full-time physician, not me just signing charts. That meant that they could qualify and apply and get the $650,000 federal grant, which they got. Then we were running. And from a guy who was doing heroin in the back room to a volunteer physician while I was still working full-time in the ER and campaigning, to several nurses, to prenatal care, to hiring new physicians, now pediatricians, now behavioral health. Now they have 130 people. And so that is probably the best personal success I've ever had in my life on anything, that we actually succeeded to that scope. They now take care of 15,000 people, all of whom get free health care, So it's something. Just so you see how my universes collide a little bit. So then I got there and Calvin Say was speaker, and I said we should do something like we've started in Kona to expand these health centers and take care of people. Wherever, I don't know the first thing about, at that time, Molokai or didn't know Maui well, I'm learning, or Kauai, but I said there must be other pockets of despair where people can't find a doctor at all, they can't get prenatal care, they can't get anything. Why don't we fund all of those things? And he said, Green, you're know-it-all, obviously, you seem nice. If you can find the money, you can fund it. If you create new funding, you can have that as your project or as a program. But we're not giving you any money from our traditional budgets. Just so you know, that's actually how they talked. And I said, fine, I'll find a way. So we raised the cigarette tax. At that point, we raised it 1 penny per year per cigarette for 6 years, which generated $65 million, 65 to 78 million, but 65 because smoking dropped. So 65 million, of which I earmarked a quarter of that money, so a quarter of $64 million to support the community health centers around the state, to fund these very programs, to do exactly what we did there. And it worked. And so they're doing pretty well. It's not a perfect system, but in Kona, they know how to do it. And they've used that money, and it takes care of real people and real families, and I see a lot of people getting help. So we did that, and so I took an experience, which I knew to be real, and when I was faced with what the realities are politically, which is you've got to find this money yourself, guy, you're on your own. We're not going to, even though you got a great idea and it will help a lot of people, we're not doing it unless you find your own way. I found my own way. And you should have seen the knockdown, drag out brawl I had with the lobbyists for big tobacco. But I convinced them that sometimes it was better to help people and not be satanic, rather than the usual way, which is kill all kinds of legislation without a hearing, and people keep getting sick. And then I told them, I'm going to stay in office and raise hell if you kill this do-gooder program for, forgive me, but a penny a cigarette. And it worked, and it certainly meant that there was less smoking among teens and adolescents because of the price, and it meant a lot more care for people, and I hope that it meant more health for people. It certainly means more access for people. And so that's another example of solutions that do exist. Government can do, on occasion, some real good. It can do one heck of a lot of bad, I can tell you that, which is why I'm going to ask you to do whatever you can, if you end up believing in me, to spread the word, to come out and sign wave, to make sure that everyone knows who at least decent candidates are and who candidates are willing to fight for people, and then the other type of candidates who are the old status quo types. So, you don't hear some of those stories very often, and I'm not surprised. And I'm the first to really raise heck when we see all of the terrible, crazy crap that comes out of Washington. But when you find a heartfelt candidate, for your council, you get lucky. And some people serve because it's a good time in their life to serve. Some people serve because they get angry and frustrated with the way things are. And some people serve because they're self-interested and they want to protect special interests. And you're smart enough to pick those people out, but a lot of the voting population doesn't get enough time to really look at candidates. They just see some pretty signs and maybe some ads. So it really takes communication. The good news is we can communicate. And I'm starting early, and we have incredible capacity to get to know our candidates, in a small state. It's just amazing. So, I'm hoping we'll do really well, and that other people will not even run because they're going to see me coming to actually take on these big issues.
The state and the counties are paying lip service to the importance of agriculture in Hawaii, yet they're completely looking the other way. That, except on most parts of the Big Island, A&B is selling ag land for $150,000 an acre. No business plan would accept $150,000 an acre for agriculture as being reasonable. Probably the most ag land should be going for is $10,000 or $15,000 an acre, and it's a fantasy. All the gentlemen's estates that is development.
Right.
That is paying for privacy. That's paying to keep other people out. It's paying for the view. And meanwhile, a beginning farmer has little opportunity other than land. There are opportunities, but the people who are holding the land are holding it for speculative reasons, and a farmer can get kicked out in 1 or 2 years. So even retiring farmers are not selling farmland to farmers. They're selling it to developers. Why should they take the loss? It seems like the only eminent domain or some kind of program where the state or the counties buys large tracts of land and land banks it and then leases it to real farmers is a solution. It's a total fantasy. If we keep going the way we've been going for the last 20, 30 years.
So the statement is, why are we continuing to allow the big landowners, I think you're referring to A and B, right? And why are we allowing that to happen when we at least have politicians pay lip service to
If they're paying $150,000 an acre,
Yeah.
they should no longer call it ag land. They should zone it for development and don't play games that it's ag land.
Yeah, the only,
Even if they are growing some fruit.
I totally agree with you. So it's a question of honesty here, okay? So we can have different priorities. If it turns out that the state and the people's priorities is money and affluence, and then in turn is honest about that, honest and zones it properly where there would be a tax base generated by that, and you could use those tax dollars to do economic development or actually subsidize land elsewhere for ag co-ops. But let me finish, this is very complicated. Then it would be at least an honest approach to what's been going on here. It has been a dishonest approach, for sure. There's no doubt in my mind that the massive tracts of land have been held up and kept away from people by curtailing water access, curtailing water rights, and by, frankly, continuing an industry which was not viable any longer financially for a very long time. I'm not trying to be harsh against people who grow sugar. I'm trying to say that was obviously not economically viable as a long-term plan for Maui or anywhere in this.
Window dressing.
Exactly. It was a cover. I mean, it was a gigantic cloak over what was really going on, which was preserving that land for a later date, presumably to do very large gated communities or hotels. Now, I personally would prefer to see it go to shared ag use, sustainable ag use. I talked today with Joe and others, and one of the reasons I'm here is because I want to hear if people really have the will and want to go towards organic farming. I personally think we're missing an incredible opportunity out of laziness at the legislative level to not brand Hawaii as the cleanest, most organic space on the planet and bring incredible increased value to our products, our land, our industry in that space. I mean, I think you could do wonderful things. Needless to say, there will be a time when hemp products are going to be very valuable. Needless to say, if we go the route of legalized marijuana, that would be a valuable crop, more than sugarcane. And needless to say, if we actually are honest about producing food here, and Joe did point out and reminded me that there was a time in Hawaii where a population of 1 million people plus was sustained by the agriculture that was not processed food, that was not causing diabetes in 40% of our population, that was not contributing to obesity across our children. There was an era where that was possible. The reality is, right now, is the outsized political clout that some special interests have has kept them in a protected position. And I can't say I will win every battle, okay? I lose plenty of battles. But what I can say is I will point out things that I think are not right. And I will tell people we're going to have it out a little bit. I don't care about your campaign contributions, and I don't care about your status in the community. I care that you're at least honest. If you want to go through the zoning process and zone that stuff to make $1 billion, and that's going to benefit Maui in some other way in an honest dialogue, okay. We don't protest or get civilly disobedient when at least people are honest with us. We protest when people lie to us or they hide what they're actually doing behind fences or they misrepresent. That's what drives people crazy. It's one of the things that I'm very up in arms about. And so I think we may or may not win that battle, but at least it should be an honest and open one. I would prefer, because, I heard, this was kind of funny. Let me be a little critical here of one of, we did this PBS talk the other day, and I heard the housing czar say the funniest thing. He said, the reason we have homelessness is because there's not enough land to build houses. And I stood there thinking, I spend a lot of time studying this issue, and we have not built affordable housing. That is accurate, but I don't know what he is looking at. There is a lot of open space. There's a lot of state land. Really, the reason we don't have affordable housing is because we have not put adequate pressure on builders and developers to contribute in a meaningful way because when they can make a couple $1 billion on a high-rise, they do it. It may be human nature, but politically, if this is our big challenge, if this is socially a huge thing for us, they should also be asked to share some of the responsibility. Anybody who's really thriving in society, I personally believe, should share a little bit. I've been pretty lucky. My family put me through college. I paid my way through medical school and had a scholarship, but I felt lucky enough to have a few bucks to do other things. This happened to be it. Developers, when they develop and make a lot of money, I think if I were the governor or lieutenant governor or mayor of any of these areas, I would force them. There would not be any major developments or any zoning approved by me, and I'm going to take Arakawa and others to task on this point. I would never have approved these mega super profitable projects without a full and real commitment in real time to get the workforce housing.
You can't even get them to do a full EIS.
Of course, they're totally full of baloney. Okay, they totally sell out. They totally sell out to the
Instead
power.
of standing up to the money, they suck up to the
Absolutely. And the good news is I'm going to crush that opponent because everyone knows it. It's just in general we've been waiting for somebody to speak up about it. And I have the luxury of speaking up about it, and I'm going to be even more candid than I intended to be tonight. Challenging a sitting governor tends to get you into one heck of a lot of hot water, good or bad. And I'm willing to go into some hot water because it's okay, I still have my job. But this is a very unique opportunity for a guy like me. This seat's being vacated. It has an outside bully pulpit on a lot of issues. And if they hold me back and don't let me do something practical legislatively, there will be nothing to prevent me from coming and speaking candidly with good analytics about big issues in the state. And if that bothers people, so be it. But no politicians like to be called out with honest data, and they don't like public pressure. I've been on that side. I've messed up a few issues. I did not like it when I got called and taken to task. I learned from it. It stung. And you hope people come out on the other side being a slightly better person. Some of these guys never got challenged, and so they never became better people. They never were forced to actually, and we were talking about today, we had hearings at the Capitol where you'll have 4 people testify in favor of something. 3 of them are lobbyists. 1 of them is the cousin of somebody, and 85 people come from all over the state, testify against it, and 400 people send in testimony, and some fool legislator passes the bill. And we all wonder, what in the heck is going on? It happens, of course. And so, but the good news is, okay, this is much, much bigger than me, okay? Here is the key. Figure out how to get the majority in your county council and figure out how to get the executive that you think you can actually communicate with and really elect him. It can actually happen. It really can. Believe me, I am a relatively counterculture agitator compared to everybody at the Capitol, and I got constantly elected because it was too much trouble to put me down politically. Now, the moment...
They couldn't put you down.
It was very difficult. It was very difficult to put me down, which is why I maintained a squeaky clean, married a Mormon, have just a couple kids on the side on my own terms life, okay? Still working. Whereas a lot of other people get real vulnerable. You can either take them down on their vulnerabilities, which is pretty hard these days because everyone seems to be scatterbrained a little bit and no one seems to understand what's real and what's not, this whole fake news thing. Or, let's do it right. Get everybody, but you already proved you can do it here. You guys are, this is a very unique thing, okay? You already proved that you can put together a supermajority on an issue where you're outgunned, outspent, and out-lied, by numerous articles, millions of dollars, and whatever capacity they think they can muster, and you won. I mean, so that means you can absolutely win every seat. Yeah, and that is true. On any given election, though, if you get, this is just my personal advice, okay? When you get people ready to run, you can only be like half the time wild and over the top. I learned this after a couple months of campaigning my first time, okay? I did learn I had to be semi-coherent and logical on some issues and willing to listen to both sides. Because at the end of the day, even the people who voted, I don't know why, or didn't vote for the referendum, that went down as a no, right, in your thing? Yeah, so you won in a massive win. But you would think, I'm sure that those of you, maybe it was all of you who were campaigning on that, would have thought, it's got to be 80-20 or better on this one. No question. And it ended up being like 50.1 to 49.9, right?
We were all shocked too, yeah.
Of course. So you can't underestimate that kind of message, economic interest. Lots of people have different biases. You can never take anything for granted. Message number 1, go out and do it in person. Campaign in person for people you believe in and press it. Lesson number 2, when someone swears at you, make 5 more phone calls because you're going to prove this is how you beat them. When someone knocks you down, says something bad about you, if you make 5 more calls, you beat them. You won. You got those votes. And if another person does it, make 5 more calls. That's how you win all the time. It didn't take big money. You know, I have not run big money campaigns. I'm going to spend a few bucks on this one because I want to make sure that everyone gets to know me. So there'll be ads and there'll be that kind of conversation. But I've already saved it. I've saved it for the last 13 years, and I want this to be a success for people. Will it be? I don't know. But I can hardly imagine we won't see wins for you in your communities. I care probably more that you win your county council and your mayor's races in the way that suits you for the people of Maui than my race, because you will then be able to move mountains locally. But as you know, you want advocates at each level because they will try to say it's got to go to the state government, or they'll try to say it's got to be ratified by the courts or by the feds. And I'll be happy to be outspoken.
There's more to our show in just a moment. This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org.
You mentioned campaign contributions, and I'm just wondering, are there any corporations that you refuse to take campaign contributions from, and who might they be?
Yeah, so I have a lucky advantage, which is the medical community is extremely supportive of me because I'm the one voice, whether they're ultra liberals or arch conservatives, they've been pretty glad to have a doctor who's crazy enough to run for office. So I've raised, meaningful resources for my campaigns there, and then didn't spend them because I never had any campaign to run against people. Monsanto, I will not take any money from. And that goes, yes, sorry. Yeah. And the same thing goes for Syngenta and all those characters. There was a time when they sent me a check and I sent it back to them, okay? And I've sat with them over, a drink to try to figure out how can we broach our differences. Do I think I can succeed there? I don't know. They'll fight to the death rather than compromise, I presume. I also don't take money from big tobacco. I don't take money from the oil industry either. Otherwise, I haven't actually had to fundraise very much from people other than people that I consider family and friends and the medical community, because I have never run a large race. But if you want to know whether I'll be taking money from those creeps this time, the answer is no. I do take money when people believe in me, and that's the only time. And honestly, I think I could win this race with no money except for enough money to put signs up, as long as I have enough time to get out there with people. But I'm not gonna take any risk. One thing that I believe now is don't let yourself get outgunned. I will fight hard. If somebody else decides they're gonna raise and spend $2 million to try to buy this seat just so that they can use this as a stepping stone to become governor, which is gonna hurt us, I'm gonna raise a ton of money from very affluent relatives of mine across the country and friends here and make sure that I at least go toe-to-toe with them. And being a white Jew from New York, Pittsburgh, and Boston, I have some of those relatives that really want to see me fight for liberal causes. It's a luxury. I won't give up my medical life, but I also am not going to let myself be disadvantaged in the political world because I get too frustrated. I've seen some really good people lose just because they don't have to have the same money as the big money sellout types, but you have to be in the ballpark. I'm a big believer in public funding of elections. I think if you leveled that playing field enough, that would solve the problem. There really should not be these Citizen United super PACs. That's totally destroyed.
Unlimited money and corruption. Unlimited
Yeah,
money and corruption.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Having said that, right now I think we're going to be in an era of where the two groups are going to go toe-to-toe. You're going to see, I'm not saying it's good, you're going to see the liberal super PACs try to arm up against the conservative ones so it's an even playing field. But to tell you the truth, you know what? If a transcendent figure emerges at the national level, they'll beat all of that. And a lot of times that big money backfires. It's just you can't be outgunned 6-1 or 10-1 because then they buy it.
If you're Maui and you go against Monsanto.
As an individual, right. So the question, well, here's the thing you guys had, right? If I may. You won that race and you came within a hair of winning a race or two others, outgunned by that same kind of money differential. So on a personal level, once you've had enough name recognition, a lot of people just won't come and spend 2 or 3 hours with a guy like me or Therese. You know, it's hard to get people on the phone for 2 minutes without them thinking, oh, why are you bugging me? 2 minutes out of 4 years. And I say, you know, please, don't swear. I'm a human being. This is what I'm going to fight for. It's okay if you don't vote for me, but these are the things. Just I wanted you to hear my voice. A lot of people won't even take that. And so that's why a big campaign, which I assume was in your newspaper day in and day out, was successful. But people don't see us as candidates in the papers day in and day out. So it's a challenge.
How do you determine what medical associations and PACs and corporations to take donations from? And what's your forecast looking forward? I can say that I generally support you.
Yeah.
I also I'm from Connecticut.
Yeah.
I saw Pfizer as a donator to your campaign.
Sure.
And so, on the topic.
Totally cool. So how do I choose? The big evil ones that I can kind of draw a pretty clear line in the sand, I avoid totally. I will meet with these individuals so that I can tell them I believe this and you believe that, and how can we work this out? Because remember, half the time I'm negotiating on a compromise that's going to be a bunch of my colleagues all against me. So I want to at least chip into their issue. The ones, and over the years I've had to learn this.
Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
That's often one of the ways. The times I've taken smaller donations, and for me, you know, a $250 donation is actually, after many years, is not a relevant donation. And I respect it, and it's a lot from an individual, but from a company, it's not meaningful.
That's why I'm curious. Why would you considering, I mean, I've looked at all your campaign stuff, and you have $432,000.
Yes.
Why would you take money, $250 from,
to be honest,
a corporation like that, hotels, etc.
Yeah.
When it's like these tiny little stuff.
No, you're totally right. But actually,
it brings up the question.
In the last, I would venture to guess, in the last 8 months, I haven't had a single donation like that. I'd have to check, but yeah. And so, I reached a threshold where I stopped even caring about donations because I didn't have any opponents, and it had become so clear to all of those organizations when they would be, let's say, if you perceived them as someone that had some animosity towards good of families or a good issue, I was sponsoring legislation against them constantly. And if anyone's fool enough to give me a donation when I'm absolutely against their issue, it's almost their problem. I mean, I don't want to say that in jest, and they're pretty few and far between. It may very well be that I had a personal relationship and I was able to get them to contribute, meaningfully large donations to do a humanitarian project or something, knowing full well I was going to kill their bill out of the gate. I'm not a purist on some issues. For instance, I used to be much harder on the insurance industry. I now have realized that thank you, sure. I now realize that there are a lot of enemies in the insurance industry offshore, but we have, in general, a very benign group of insurance executives here. They, on the whole, are trying to support the healthcare system here. They're not really competitive. When I find that they've refused someone's test, I fight them tooth and nail and make them approve the test. I make them get people antibiotics or expensive medications if necessary because I have a close relationship with them. One could say that's keep your enemies, your friends close and your enemies even closer. But some of those industries which I had a historic animosity with, I don't now. But there are some that I categorically could never even sleep with myself if I took a donation from. And that's where those large organizations, which I see have been dishonest, I won't take a donation. And I will say this, I'm now, this is new for me, I'm now in the big leagues, so to speak, or I'm entering the big leagues, and a lot of these races are critically important. You do more actually as state rep, councilwoman, or state senator often than you do as a congressperson, but when I'm running for statewide office, I imagine that some of the powerful interests will be arrayed against me. And again, I want to be blunt with people. I won't disadvantage myself to win, but they're more than welcome to watch this footage and know full well that I'm coming for them. You know, I mean, I'm not shy about it. And it's funny, I had an experience where the big liquor companies came up to me I was at some kind of National Council of Legislators, something or other, and they came up and thanked me for being a true bastard to them because it was interesting. Well, because they probably did appreciate the fact that they had some do-gooder out there to fight, but it was interesting because they told me, this guy was pretty drunk, and he said, you know, Green, we've appreciated having to do battle with you, even though we tend to win because we've bought and sold some of your colleagues. They straight up told me that. But we appreciate that you are going to be on occasion an analytical foil, because even we realize that there are examples that we have to be reined in, whether it's drunk driving, and you know, I'm able to play that game. Now, I would never take a check from them. Even my hypocrisy has some bounds, okay? But it is evident that there could be a space where we joust with people that we truly feel need to be reined in, yet, you know, we don't have to consider them. We don't have to consider them enemies forever. Some will remain enemies, it appears. I will tell you candidly, I tried very hard to convince Monsanto that they had some wins that they could achieve if they would go along with buffer zones and transparency of the chemicals they used. They would probably not have the same antagonism on some of their other issues, whether it's bans, say, on GMOs. I personally would prefer that we don't go down the road of GMOs at all, okay? Personally. But as a legislator, if I had the assurances that we passed legislation and they were upheld in court or they weren't challenged in court, that we were going to have no pesticides being sprayed anywhere near public spaces, that we knew all the chemicals that were being used so that we could study them, we could study their interactions, I think that you would want, all of us, we'd want to try to find some kind of common ground. Do I trust that they would do that? No, I don't. And I pressed them and it did not work, okay? And I told them I'd press them again and again. And I told them when I run and beat whatever lackey they put up, they're gonna really have a difficult time and they better not fund his campaign because I'm gonna be really angry when I see that. You know, however, and that just motivates me, you know? But needless to say, if we can achieve some wins, it's better than getting our butts beat all over the place. The good news is you're starting to win. You know, I think that those guys' days are numbered with the.
You gotta pick your war.
You do, and so some of the wars I fight, like look, tobacco, you got to fight that war. It's killing people. Large chemical companies, you got to fight that war. Absolutely. Pharmaceutical companies, most of the time it's crummy. Every once in a while, though, we need what they do. You know, so. Do I believe that we should regulate them?
Yes.
We do. I do. I did finish that. Without consideration for any of the work that they do. I mean, we want them to function. Do I think that they should be able to market in a predatory way? No. Do I think that they should be able to advertise to physicians? No. Do I believe that pharmaceutical companies should be able to get around the generic laws and extend their patents? No. Do I believe that they should be able to force people to take clusters immunizations? No. So, I mean, I'm happy to do war with them on all those things, but I also would be more than happy to make sure that they are able to do standardized trials if people want to do it. There was a right to try drug law that I submitted, which was actually supported by progressives and some of the pharmaceutical companies. That right to try is, if you have terminal illness and you would like to try a drug that's not on label, that you can try it and you're allowed to participate in a trial. Right now, you can't. Ironically, the pharmaceutical companies wanted that one, of course, because they're going to benefit, but just maybe some child with a bad leukemia might too. You know, so I don't want to stab them completely.
Who would be against that?
Who was against that bill? The governor vetoed that bill, and it made me mad.
To choose your own remedy, your own personal remedy.
It was pretty surprising. I think that if you're a purist and you believe in double-blind studies, it might fly in the face of that.
I'm not sure, but I think
Thank you,
the
Councilwoman.
issue on that one was because doctors were taking money
Yeah.
to enter patients into trials.
Oh,
And
they're
they weren't
getting paid
obligated
to make the trial.
They weren't obligated to say. And so that was an issue, even not solved today.
And that would merit a problem. You know, I'm kind of a look. I was a doctor for 7 years before I got into politics. Okay, I never once had a freebie or participated from any of those guys because I was working in Ka'u, right? And also I was working in Hawaii, where I don't think there's not much of that stuff going on, or less than the mainland. I'm aware that some of my colleagues get paid six-figure monies to participate in drugs. Now, I could barely scrounge a free drug for the people of Ka'u, and I couldn't get a pharmaceutical rep to save their life to drive down there, right? So that was frustrating to me. I would love to use my position as Lieutenant Governor physician to force them into those communities, and of course to always have to be transparent. Those laws have evolved some. You can't get away with that kind of stuff as much as a healthcare provider. But so a lot of these bills are pretty nuanced. But I'm kind of like an overly trusting person a lot of the time until I've been burned several times. And so I can't sometimes imagine a doctor doing that. Now it happens. There's no question. I mean, look, I now know that happens. But if I were running a little clinic, I would happily, if a family came to me and said, I want to try this thing, I certainly wouldn't be trying to make a profit off of it. So the world's a complicated place.
So Daniel, nice to meet you. I'm just getting myself more into the politics of things. I'm really glad to hear everything that you have to say regarding like all of it. It's very interesting. When it comes to the project of what I have overheard of the group, which Dr. Joe, what Dr. Joe was speaking of, the one where
You mean last week?
yes, yeah. The one where you plan on getting perhaps 800 homes, 800 people to swap.
Well, there you go.
homes.
It's such an epidemiological study where we're looking at if is there exposure, correlation with exposure and chronic illness.
Got it. That's great.
So something like that, would something like that have to go through like a legislative, like an office of your type? Like would that have to be like, is that something that we have to work through the state to do? I guess is my question.
It's a good question. Okay, so and you can expound on your question. Let me give you my first impression, because even Joe and I, who spent the day together, didn't have a chance to talk about this. First of all, it's a great idea. Okay, one problem that we've had for a while is that the Department of Health hasn't tracked illness adequately, and they haven't tracked a lot of the kind of the overlap between what the agricultural department has allowed to have go on in our state and what the Department of Health is seeing as disease. And to some extent, it's because we've underfunded a lot of Department of Health services, especially the public health departments. So the answer is, it is better if a well-functioning Department of Health participates honestly about that and doesn't get in the way, but allows a citizen group that's associated with the university or associated with a public health entity to do it. There's nothing that would stop a private entity from doing it, I don't believe at all. But sometimes you need data, you need information. And one of the problems we've had about, say, the pesticide companies is they won't tell us how much they're spraying. You would think the Department of Ag would comfortably maybe blind the company's names or even blind certain information if they're going to be sensitive about it, but still give it to health professionals to study. And obviously,
Not keep it a secret.
you would think it would be ideal if they would work with us. I now realize that there's going to be part of this world and part of this political world that's going to work independent and separate from government. For instance, I interestingly received an email a half hour before we sat down from someone in California who is extraordinarily wealthy and would like to consider funding part of the homeless pilot that I discussed here in Hawaii, because they would like to see something happen in a very positive social space to set an example, and if that resource isn't yet available through government or committees, to do it. By the same token, Dr. Joe's plan, which would require a lot of organization and energy and time, and certainly some resources, yes, you could do it if you had someone willing to fund it. The challenges are, number one, it's sometimes hard to have that much time and money, okay? The second challenge is often industry will demonize the private groups for doing something on our own, and they will try to discredit us. And frankly, we should be able to rely on our departments of health and agriculture to be honest with us. It's yet another place that for any of those who watched me in a hearing once with the Department of Ag guys, I called them out for being, criminally negligent in their expression of what they do. It wasn't a criminal act. It's how can you not tell us what you're doing? These are public issues. These are openness issues. People have gotten accustomed to being able to get away with not sharing information, and that is an era we should move away from.
And there's a lot of corporations that are doing that, like Monsanto and more. I'm curious if this project is going to be privately funded, or if there's an outlook to perhaps have like a state fund.
Well, I can answer that real quickly, although this is more about Josh's stuff.
No, please.
I self-funded some of the equipment privately. Shaka has stepped up in a big way to help fund these things. These things don't have to go through the Department of Health unless they are for diagnosing or treating illness, in which case while they are required to go through the Department of Health, which would be the fox guarding the hen house.
Right, which is often a big problem.
That's a problem. There have been initiatives where they've talked about having money to do testing, and the funding hasn't come through from the state. So that's the quick answer. Right now it's private because that's the only way we can do it. One would hope that the Department of Health would do it, but could you trust them? When Josh was kind enough to stand up with us against the cane burning, he stood on stage, and you probably don't know is the story of when he was driving here, Deb Mader went to pick him up. There was an accident. He went and saved somebody's life on the side of the road, and then came. He gave us.
This is this guy right here.
It's this guy right here. That's right. That's my friend Josh, right? So we all stood up. Trez stood on stage, and many other people, Alika and Josh, and we all stood up. The Department of Health, the head, we invited her. She was right there.
The state's silent.
Roz was right there. I went to the Department of Health and talked to him, and I said, there are these inconsistencies in how you implement the air monitoring and stuff. So could that be done by the state? If it was overseen by somebody who gave a damn about people like Josh, that would be great. Right now we have political appointees serving in these positions, and political appointees are appointed by people who are paid by corporations and lobbyists. And so that in itself is a conflict of interest and is problematic.
Right.
And I think it depends on having somebody with integrity like Josh doing stuff.
What we really need, Josh, is more home rule. We need a Department of Transportation, Education, Agriculture, and Health on the outer islands. Because the people in Honolulu are too easily boxed in or compromised or influenced by people who are not interested in the same things that we are.
Right, and the way to ultimately achieve that, I've had that conversation with a couple people over the years, and they've asked, how can we create change very rapidly? And one way is if you get the right executive of your county, you can move mountains quite quickly. For instance, let's say we didn't want to see any more pesticide spraying going on here in Maui County or on Big Island, say, but you get the mayor of one of those counties elected that categorically is opposed to that. Well, they could on day one stop all the county spraying or any local use if they chose to. They could make it very difficult at the very least. And that would create an environment where you could win some of these battles more quickly. But It's pretty challenging, you're right, because Department of Education and Health are statewide responsibilities, and they don't tend to be county responsibilities, and it leaves a big power vacuum. The other challenge that we have, which what you express, is the very ironic situation, which is that while they will challenge our legitimacy as private sector individuals doing a heartfelt study, the industries themselves sponsor these big studies and then only share the pieces of data that they want to share. And yet they tout them as relevant and valued. And a lot of times, if they do have a plant in one of the departments, they verify it and promote it as though it was fair, science that had been performed. It takes, I guess the message is, and I think we are coming up on 8 o'clock, and I did promise to get back to my wife and kids, and so you have my word.
Gotta get you back or they're gonna be mad at me.
Yes, but I will be here many times in the next year and 2 months to be with you and anyone that you want me to be with, provided you make sure that we share the information so we get it out there. But I'll be here anyway.
There's just one more.
No, let me. Oh yeah, absolutely. We have a little more time. I wanted to say the big message here is you've already succeeded in rising up and winning a major election. Okay, a major one. You have absolutely the capacity on Maui. Maui is the place where I have the least concern right now of all places in the whole state that people are going to organize and rally in a positive way for families right now. There's some other great spots around the state, and I know that there's sleeping giants all over, but they're still sleeping in some parts of the state. And they have to be awakened the way you, and I want to give credit to your organizations, be it Shaka, there's 4 or 5 of these organizations that came together that were extraordinary, and you pulled off what is generally considered a miracle against all odds. It is absolutely, therefore, doable for candidates that you like and for issues that you care deeply about. So you've done it. A lot of other places don't yet have that kind of confidence, and I'm going to try to, thank you for coming. I'm going to try to, it's good to see you. I'm going to try to make sure people know it can be done, and it can be done statewide. And I'll be doing it on August 11th with you next year. And we're going to have an exciting year, without a doubt. So pick the people you care about. Pick the issues that you want to go all in for. This is an era, I think, where we have motivation. Needless to say, the feds are giving us more than enough motivation to be activated for our children, for our loved ones, for our communities, more than I can ever remember before. This is our time. So I think I'd like to end there and then spend time privately afterward, just because some people will want to go home. But I have these. I didn't bring enough business cards, but these have my cell phone number on it and an email address. You will get me on this number, okay? So if I could pass these out to people, please spread that information. Send an email to your friends. Tell them to just call or write me. They will get me. They should tell me what matters to them most. And over the course of the next about 14 months, I'll speak to many thousands of people if they would like to talk. And I think it will be on us. If we don't take this government back for ourselves, we'll only have ourselves to blame. And I don't think that's going to happen. I really think this is going to be a great year. So thanks again for having me, and I'll stay on for a few more minutes.
This program is brought to you as a public service by Maui Causes. Maui Causes is a crowd-funded media production group that provides media production services to a variety of environmental and progressive causes here in Maui County. Visit us on the web at www.mauicauses.org.